I'm really happy to welcome you all again. This is the second webinar that we're hosting with Impact Central. Tonight we're focusing on all things impact, and we're delighted to have Josh with us. Josh is our part of our faculty. Gordon will introduce him properly in a little bit, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit how the session is going to run and what you can expect. So Josh and Gordon are going to go into the detail of the three frameworks of impact, and then we're going to have some time where you guys can ask questions, and then at the very end we've got some exciting news to share with you from our side, so please stay tuned for that. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome Gordon and Josh.
Hey everyone.
Okay, thank you so much, SL, and thank you everybody for joining. For those of you that were with us last week, it's great to have you back on our second webinar for the Impact Central webinar series. And as SL mentioned, we are again joined by one of our faculty members at Impact Central. And this week we're going to be speaking about impact, and Josh is our impact faculty member, our lead impact faculty member on that. And it's obviously, for an impact accelerator, this is a really important topic. Now, Josh and I have been basically talking about impact for more than 2 years now. And I had recently launched the first accelerator cohort, and I was trying to find some people that I could, get a lot of information about how should startups think about measuring impact. And while there was a lot of answers that kind of came at me, what I really enjoyed in my conversations with Josh is that he was always asking the right questions. In other words, this is not something that's maybe been done before that's easy, and startups are all kind of a little different. So what are some of the things that we can think about in terms of, how can we be more helpful to startups in terms of dealing with impact? And obviously with startups, they're also on a really tight budget, whereas a lot of the impact developments have been at very large NGOs or places where there was a huge impact budget where a lot of things could be looked at. So this has been a great topic that I've really enjoyed talking to Josh with for over 2 years. And I thought, maybe just to start off, Josh, you could talk a little bit about, what are some of the answers around impact and your views on impact?
Well, thanks, Gordon. I think, to be fitting with our normal way of conversations, I think we need to start with a question to answer your question, which is actually, what do we mean by impact? Because this is something that, we've talked about a lot. I'm sure a lot of people on the call now might even be thinking, what do these guys mean by impact? How are they going to define it? And I think that's really important before we begin. And I'll tell you what I think. And I think about impact in terms of cause and effect. So when talking about impact in our context, it's sort of impact investing, impact startups, and impact is referring to the effects an investment or a business has on the planet and on society. And these can be positive or negative. So really in what we're hoping the businesses, the startups that join us on the accelerator are all focusing on positive impacts, but it is important to remember they can be positive or negative. Mm-hmm. So, and in the impact we're referring to, we're usually talking about intentional impact. So the intentional positive effects a business creates because of the strategy it pursues. And I think this emphasis on positivity and intentionality contrasts with some of the thinking around sustainability in business that people might be familiar with. So with thinking about sustainability, often approach that as looking at how you can reduce the negative effects a business has on the environment or society. Because if these negative effects are too many or too large, then that is essentially unsustainable, and society or the planet can't and won't bear it. So yeah.
Thanks for clearing that up, Josh. I know this feels like one of our very typical conversations where you're helping me straighten these things out in my head. I know that you're obviously very passionate about this. You've been doing this for quite a while. I think it's always interesting to hear how people get into something that they're passionate about. And I know in your case, it's a particularly interesting beginning because it has to do with toilets. So tell us a little bit about how you got into impact.
So, well, yeah, some of my colleagues, they call me Mr. Toilet, and that's not all I do. But it was quite a fortuitous turn of events, really. I think to say the full story, it kind of began when I went to do my undergrad at university. I'd always wanted to be a doctor growing up, sort of really focused on that, really like this idea of helping, giving back to society, helping people. But when it came to apply for my undergrad, I thought I wanted to do something a bit more adventurous than medicine, and I chose history, which might not seem that adventurous, but I've enjoyed it a lot. I was really taken by these really the original batch of social entrepreneurs, people who had great big ideas. I'd say these people coming through in the French Revolution or the 20th century, 19th century in the UK, who really wanted to change society and change society for the many, to say a Jeremy Corbyn phrase, or for the vast majority of the population, rather than focusing on what life was like for the elite. And so I went to study history to get involved in this sort of thinking, and then I ended up not being able to escape medicine and ended up focusing on the history of public health and the history of public health in Latin America. And I wrote my dissertation on the history of public health in Latin America at the beginning of the 20th century, which actually was all just about toilets. And it was the Rockefeller Foundation. So still a big foundation today. Rockefeller Foundation, actually, they came up with the term impact investing, apparently, at some meeting in 2007 is what a lot of the literature refers to it. But back then, the Rockefeller Foundation were interested in toilets, and they were interested in toilets because if they could build toilets across Central Latin America, so Colombia, Honduras, in Mexico, people who were currently suffering debilitating diseases like roundworm, hookworm, all these parasites, and couldn't work, the Standard Oil couldn't go in. So Standard Oil, a lot of the money funded the Rockefeller Foundation, they couldn't go in and extract these valuable resources. So this business through philanthropy went in to improve public health in a way to improve economic opportunity, and also to be able to take a bit of a cut off the top, hopefully down the line. So I thought this was fascinating. Spent a long time transcribing these videos about toilets and parasitic worms to write in my dissertation, and I handed it in, thought that's it, never going to really think about toilets again. A few weeks later, I went in to do some work experience at a PR firm, and they were just working with Domestos, the toilet bleach, which everyone, I think all based in the UK, will be familiar with. And Domestos toilet bleach were just getting into a partnership with UNICEF. And the idea was that for every bottle of UNICEF, every bottle of Domestos sold, they would give some money to UNICEF. And this would help fund UNICEF sanitation programs. And this is still on the bottles today. If you go into Sainsbury's, you'll see a little UNICEF logo on the Domestos bottle. And this is what we were getting into at the time. And similarly, actually, with Andrex, we did a big project with them, the toilet paper, to Andrex putting money into, I think it's currently WaterAid, but I think they started with UNICEF too. So for every packet of Andrex sold, it's a little toilet saves lives logo on the packet. They would put money towards these social causes. So obviously, when everyone was panic buying toilet roll through the pandemic, that was pretty good for the toiletless people of their markets. But yeah, so essentially that really, from there, got really interested in this way that business could contribute to society. A lot of that was quite philanthropic, but it was big with working with Unilever specifically. They started trying a bit more of an innovative ways of doing things. And this, for me, is when it all kind of clicked, that actually business can create positive change and it can do it in a commercially sustainable way. And if the business can realize an advantage by doing that, so if it's because people want to buy their products more, or it helps them understand a different market, then actually that business is going to keep doing it, and it's going to be sustainable impact. And yeah, for me, that was exciting.
And let's just stick on the history topic. I think it's really interesting, just a little bit longer, because I know for a lot of people, you know, the very difficult conditions that we're in now, a global pandemic, it's really highlighted, you know, inequalities, and of course also how that's disproportionately impacting the poorest people in society. But impact's actually been growing quite a bit even before the pandemic. Maybe you can just highlight a little bit over kind of the last 10 years of what you've seen, the changes in kind of the clients you've been working with, and how impact has gotten to where we are today.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I think I had the good fortune to be working about 10 years ago with some organizations that were taking this really seriously. Those at the more interesting, innovative end of the spectrum, who would at the time, as I say, it's a lot of it focused on toilets for me, but really trying to crack how you can use business models, sustainable business, to create change for people who can't access goods or services that they need. And for those organizations, it's been really interesting to watch how they've developed, because the ones that were doing exciting stuff are almost doing even more exciting stuff now. And they're, so to say, Unilever, currently working on a project that Unilever set up with EY and the Department for International Development. It's called Transform. And this is essentially, it's an accelerator and impact investing initiative where they are investing in startups in South Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, and giving them access to the best thinking in branding, in commercial decision making, in business strategy. But they're combining this with all of the tools that the Department for International Development have used in terms of how do you measure impact when you're doing an aid project. And so it's really interesting work. You see big corporates getting involved in what could be called development work, or spinning that slightly differently, and changing the way the world views economic development. At the other end of the spectrum, companies who probably 10 years ago thought this was not something they wanted to be involved in, something that was not really the place for a business to play. They should focus on making profit rather than being concerned about the environment or being concerned about their impact on society. We're seeing a lot of those realize that they do want to be involved. And in some cases, that's been because of a change of heart or because of a change of leadership, so a generational shift in what business should do, and people more thinking, having an eye on sustainability, because of more ingrained, this is the right thing to do. And on the other side of that, it's businesses thinking, we need to do this because everyone else is doing it and we need to catch up. And if we don't, we're going to fall behind and we're going to be seen as the least preferential option on the shelves, or that sort of thing. So yeah, not to say we're just in it for trendy reasons, but it's good to see that it's becoming trendy, because it means that fewer people are ignoring sustainability and impact.
That's, I think, really interesting. I mean, in particular, we could, I think, spend quite a bit of time talking about kind of what's happening in the corporate space and in the NGO space, and all the good stuff that's happening and the pressure that's being created. But I know, a topic that the two of us have focused on for a long time in particular has been startups, because startups do have that challenge that I mentioned at the beginning of the call, which is that they don't have a lot of resources, not a lot of money, and impact measurement can be quite expensive. So I think people would like to hear how you think startups can think about, and two questions really. So if I'm a startup and I'm an impact startup, how can I communicate the impact that I'm doing, and also what are ways that I might be able to demonstrate the impact, even though it's very early stage and I might not be able to have a lot that I could show?
Yeah, definitely. So, well, the first part in communicating your impact is actually working out what your impact is, and really sort of settling on a precise definition of what it is that you're going to change and how you're going to change it. So it's pretty easy to come up with a big, ambitious statement, and we do want ambitious goals, right? We want to change things, but it's easy enough to come up with a big, ambitious statement. But when you drill down into that, understanding what it actually means and how you can interrogate that, and what you would actually do to get there. So once you're clear on what that impact is, and what you want to achieve, you need to be really clear on how you're going to achieve it. So how the resources you put in and the activities you do will lead you to creating impact. And I'm just going to pull up a slide of a template of, it's called a logic model, which I think would be one of the first steps beyond defining what you're trying to achieve. I think, can everyone see that slide?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it? Oops, sorry. 1 second.
That's it.
There we go. So yeah, this is a template logic model. Now, if you Google logic model, you'll see lots of examples, lots of variously similar examples of what is essentially a description of how what you do, the inputs and the activities, create the impact that you want your business to create. And this is really useful in terms of working out from a communication standpoint how you're going to define what it is that you do so you can talk about it. But it's also really useful for getting to a position where you can interrogate the logic from how you're going to do what you do to create the impact that you actually want. And you would think about your inputs, you would think about the activities that you actually do, you would think about what are the short-term changes that you create through this, what are the more medium-term changes, and how does that contribute to the ultimate impact. Now, once you've got this, you can begin to think about how you are going to measure your impact. You're going to be able to think about what your programs actually are, or what your business is doing to do that. And there, you're going to have lots of interesting stuff to talk about. And this is where the communication comes from. So you can't really start communicating until you're doing something, until people aren't going to listen unless you have something to say. And for me, from all the experience I've had in public relations, in communications with huge businesses, huge brands, and far smaller startups, the most important bit is getting crystal clear on what it is that you're trying to do. And then building a story around that and talking about the process, talking about how it is that you're actually doing that. And to get a little bit more granular, I'm just going to show one more slide on this, if that's okay, which is, this is called the 5 dimensions of impact, a slightly adapted version. And this is a really useful way for thinking, again, granularly and precisely about what the impact you're creating is. Now, I've borrowed these from IMP. IMP is the Impact Management Project. It's a huge, well, I think 2,000 different organizations and individuals are involved in it. And it's essentially drawing together all the latest thinking, not all of it's exactly the same, but thinking on impact to try and build an industry standard so that everyone's talking in the same language. Because, as I say, what I've defined impact as is pretty similar to what I think other people will, but there's slightly different definitions. So these are the questions you need to ask yourself or your business partner, or if you're on the accelerator program, these are the questions that we'll be working through. So just to talk you through them, what is your impact? What is the positive outcome that you're contributing to? And how important is that outcome to the stakeholders, to the people who will be your audience or the beneficiaries of this? Who experiences that impact? So who actually are these beneficiaries or the audience? How do you pin them down? How do you define? It could be a wide group. It could be a really narrow group. Not to say one is more important than the other, but it's really important to be precise, right? How much impact do you actually create? So this is with an impact. Gordon, we've talked about this a lot. Do you go for a large number of people? Do you want to hit 1,000 or 1 million people, or do you want to hit a smaller number of people, but actually make a much deeper, more meaningful change in their lives? Is there a way you could? What is it? I mean, not time for on this webinar, but what is better, reaching 1 million people with not very much impact, or reaching 2 people and totally changing their lives for the better and forever? And then 2 interesting ones, and I think maybe later, the contribution and the risks. So what is your contribution to the impact? How much did what you've done or an investment in your business, how much has that contributed to additional impact or additional change to people's lives? How do you know that what happened wouldn't have happened otherwise? And then what the risks associated with this impact are is another one, and is absolutely essential to consider. And understanding why the impact could be different to what you expect it to be and what the implications of this could be. And I was going to say the first three are probably primary ones. The second two might come later in your consideration of this, but these are widely used across the industry, the sector, and really cover off the main things that you want to be thinking about in your startup.
And Josh, let me ask you, just from your experience, which one of these five is the most challenging for people to engage with?
So, well, I think contribution and risks are maybe a little bit more complicated in the way that you approach thinking about them. Not that complicated, but maybe it helps to have someone work through those with you. But actually, what is your impact can be the most challenging, because often people will say, as I said before, they've got a big, bold, ambitious target, and they say, this is what we're going to do. And that's often a great idea, great focus. But when you need to start thinking a bit more about how are you going to achieve it, and drill it down a few levels. And often this conversation about what is your impact, people think it's going to be the most straightforward one. But when you start thinking about how are we going to measure that, how are we going to prove it, how are we going to actually do what we say that we do, how could we, thinking back to that logic model on the previous slide, how could we show that the activities of our startup create this change, then that becomes a slightly longer conversation.
Yeah,
which is a good one.
Along those lines, I mean, is it kind of that you bury yourself in this once and then you have it solved, or is it a more iterative process?
This one, I'd say it's iterative. I mean, with startups, everything's iterative, right? So we're testing, we're seeing what works, we're building, sort of experimenting constantly. And if something isn't quite right, then it's not a point, then we find out the way that it does work. Definitely that the logic model as well on the previous slide, that will be iterative, because it's, again, testing, trialing. So changing is not a failure, it's just learning. So it's all a positive experience. And yeah, I'd say if you stuck with the same the same logic model for the entirety of your program, I'd say there might be something wrong, or you weren't thinking about it enough.
Evolution.
Yeah.
I mean, I think those are both really helpful frameworks. I guess one of the questions that I get asked a lot by startups is, is there a way I can classify my particular impact? How can I look at what exactly is an impact startup in terms of defining that impact? And I know the two of us have spent a lot of time on this topic. In fact, we've actually written a blog. So we write our weekly blog now, comes up on Impact Central for those that are interested. The next blog comes out tomorrow. And the one that we wrote, I think a couple weeks ago, we actually introduced a framework for doing just that,
yes,
for classifying. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Josh.
Yes, so I'll pull this up now as well. 1 second. So yeah, as Gordon said, then there's lots of thinking, lots of great work on coming up with different frameworks to classify impact investing, and there's a few other ones that we've taken into account in this. But this is, you can see my slide now. We've got three frameworks for understanding how a startup or a larger business actually creates impact. And to say at the beginning, these can overlap, and some businesses will do more than one or all three. But this is really useful for understanding what mechanism is at play in that you your business activities are creating positive change. So the first one, innovation driving impact. And by innovation, we don't necessarily mean something fancy, high-tech, AI, digital innovation. It's not to say there's anything wrong with that. It's great. I mean, we're all speaking together from all over the place now because of digital innovation. But this can also be really low-tech innovation, just changing the way that a business does something to something that hasn't been tried before. I think one of our blogs talks about this, taking ideas that have been tried in one industry into another industry, and say one thing impact innovation-wise is innovation in supply chains. And an example that we have talked about quite a bit is the Body Shop. So how the Body Shop used innovation in its supply chains to change the cosmetics industry, or the cosmetics products it produced, to be way better for the environment. Another one we talked about was how Ben & Jerry's did similar with their supply chain, in that, so this does overlap with the other examples too, but essentially, rather than choosing to go for the lowest price ingredients, it would go for ingredients that had a positive social or environmental impact too. The second framework, and this one is, so business success supporting impact. This in a way is an evolution of what I was talking about with toilets, right? So the business is giving money, with the Domestos example, Domestos was donating money to UNICEF. So the more bottles of Domestos it sold, the more social impact UNICEF could create. But how could you take that a step further and make this truly integral to the business and even amplify that impact even further? And we've been doing some work with a startup that Gordon worked with previously called New Ground Coffee, which is a great example of this. And New Ground Coffee is a coffee company based in Oxford that works with people who've been released from prison to train them in barista skills, in coffee roasting, and also general skills, and give them support to be moving back out of prison into society. And New Ground is part owned by a charitable foundation that was set up, and part of the profits of New Ground go to this foundation to fund their impact program specifically. So the more successful the business is, the more impact it will create through this charitable foundation. And then the final one talking about is how business methods can improve impact. So there's a lot of talk around how businesses can increase efficiency and do things a lot better than, or well, differently, do certain things differently, more efficiently than other organizations that might be trying to do social impact or environmental impact programs. So how can you introduce these business ideas into social impact programs? One example that we've been talking about as well is with digital food banks. So food banks are a really old concept. They're set up by the Trussell Trust in the UK, and the long heritage of, unfortunately, people not being able to access enough food, and pretty standard way of a food bank working. Previously, I'm sure everyone's familiar with seeing a food bank sort of kiosk in the supermarket at the checkout. But applying business sort of designed innovation to this, we're now seeing digital food banks. We're now seeing the ability for people to donate food when they're doing their online shopping. And this is using innovation to adapt to the way that people behave nowadays, the way that people do shopping. And in doing so, it's helping to improve the impact of something that's been a long-standing challenge to address.
Thanks for explaining those, Josh. I know there's going to be some questions coming up from the participants on any of the things we've been talking about, particularly the frameworks that you've been showing on the last 3 slides. I guess just one kind of last question for me that I think some people would like to know. So first of all, it is so great. We really thank you that you've decided to come onto our faculty and to lead our efforts on impact. So thank you for that. Some people out there that are thinking about coming onto the program, they're probably wondering, what would they be working on with you? What maybe you could give them an idea of how you would interact with them and help them think about their impact ideas and drive those forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd be doing a proper session introducing everyone to some of the concepts that we talked through today in a little bit more detail. Introducing you to some of the tools that I showed. So first, that logic model was to do a theory of change, which is a similar sort of idea, helping you articulate what it is that your impact is. Working through those 5 dimensions of impact is another crucial step, and helping, as I say, it's probably not something you do once or we do once and then file it away and say it's done. So helping you think through that and build on it, and it evolves as your thinking evolves through the course of the accelerator program and the months afterwards as you're developing your business further. But I think actually the most exciting thing is working out how you can measure it, and how you can do this in a way that isn't going to take all your time up or cost loads of money, and come up with a way that you can actually start to understand whether you are creating the impact that you're aiming for. If not, why not? And as I said before, if you have to change something, it's not failure, it's that you're learning from it. And so we measure so we can learn, and we measure so we can learn and adapt if it's not going quite as we intended. But also critically, we measure so we can talk about it, and we can tell people about what your startup is doing, how it's doing it. And this is important because we want people to know about the great work that you're doing, but it's also really important because some of these stories are the sorts of things that you're going to be able to use in your marketing, in your brand stories, on your websites, on social media, to build the buzz about your brand and show that beyond just saying that you're create positive impact, you can actually demonstrate that you do it. And for me, it'll be really exciting for you guys to know it, to see that people are benefiting from it. But it's also what your customers are going to want to hear too. So
yeah, I think that's so true, Josh, in that we talk about, a lot of people are always thinking about investment in terms of your investors and what they're looking for, but it's really kind of all your supporters, basically. People, obviously, investors are providing financial resources, but people that are going to purchase your products, your services, people that are going to come work with you, people that are going to support you in any way, the clearer you can be about your impact, the more inspired they are to help you. So it is such an important part of getting that right and communicating that. I'm going to turn it back over. First of all, thank you again, Josh. That was really great. Really appreciate all of your answers on those questions. And I want to turn it over now to SL to manage the Q&A session. Please, and I'll turn it over to SL. Thanks.
Thank you, Gordon. So now is your opportunity to ask any questions that you want. As you're thinking about those questions, 2 really exciting things from us. We have opened the applications, you'll be delighted to know, for our September Accelerator Program. And the September Accelerator Program starts on the 15th of September. So if you are an impact business and you feel like an Accelerator Program is something that's going to help to take you to the next level, and you want to find more about that, I'm going to pop that link in the chat. I will also pop that link on an email afterwards, so don't worry if you miss it in the chat. And then the second thing is, if you're not an impact business, but you're hugely interested and you know a lot of people in the sector, then we have got a special referral link. If you want to nominate an impact startup for the Accelerator Program, then we'll send a link for that as well. So I think we have 2 questions so far. Okay, so this is a question from Joyce around DFID not coming under the FCO. So any thoughts? How do you see the UK's role in international development with DFID being no more and coming under the FCO? And then secondly, any thoughts on theory of change as a model?
So the DFID thing, personally, I think it's a shame because I worked with some fantastic people at DFID who I would hope that they continue doing the fantastic work that they're currently working on 2 projects with DFID. That's really exciting, innovative work. And DFID really are doing fantastic stuff in this pushing innovation and development. But I could talk a lot longer about that. Maybe I'll write a blog on that another time. Don't want to get bogged down in it now. Thoughts on theory, Joyce? You can send me an email. We can have a long discussion if you want. But on the theory of change as a model, I think it's really useful. There's definitely there's some critics of it, and it's not the only thing that you should use, right? You can't just say, this is what I'm going to achieve, this is my theory of how my venture is going to create change. But it's a great starting point. It's a great way to get you to be really crystal clear on your thinking about it. It's a great way to say you as though it's just an individual. Businesses aren't just one person. So it's really important to get everyone who's involved as an important interested person in the business to be clear on what it is that you're trying to do and how you're going to get there. So yeah, I mean, I've been working with the theory of change for many years now. I've been doing workshops with startups on it. I've been working with far bigger organizations on it, and it's not the be all and end all of impact, but it's definitely been useful in my experience. Happy for anyone to disagree, and would love to know why if you do.
Awesome. Okay, so next question. What media, as in breaking news, so many questions, it's zooming up. What media, as in breaking news outlets, blogs, etc., are key when watching or keeping an eye on what's going on in the impact space? And then a tag-along question to that. So maybe if you could answer the first bit of that, Joshua, and then the second bit might be a bit more linked to Gordon. So how do investors define investing in impact? It still seems quite vague. I can possibly add one thing to the media news side of things. One organization that's really good, I think, is Pioneers Post. Another thing that we're thinking about doing is creating a WhatsApp or Slack community for this space to try and keep people connected and up to date. So if that is something that you'd be interested in, then drop a yes in the comments and then we'll know that we're on the right track. But Josh, do you want to take that first one if you have any other ideas on ways to monitor what's going on in the space, and then Gordon the second one with the investor side of things?
So not to be greedy, but I'm going to take both questions in one.
Oh,
if that's it, because they overlap, right? So
yeah.
So Mike, the media that you should watch for this depends on how you're defining impact, investing in impact, right? Because so what I really enjoy reading the Financial Times, specifically on impact. They have a section called Moral Money. I think if you just Google Financial Times Moral Money, you can see that. And that's a weekly, maybe bi-weekly newsletter that they send out, and it was free for a month for non-subscribers recently. So I'd recommend having a look at that. But that is more geared towards the kind of Financial Times reader type people. So this is less startup focused, but really important and interesting to see what's happening in the larger space. And that's what are big investment banks thinking about impact? What are they thinking about ESG, which is, if you're not familiar, kind of affiliated to it. But if you are, so some people define impact as that big publicly traded publicly traded equities. Other people, what we're working on is more at the startup end of the spectrum, which is investing in businesses that create that positive impact. And Pioneers Post is a great place to look for that. There's a online news outlet called Impact Alpha, which is, they do a good email newsletter, but I wouldn't necessarily, I think it's quite expensive to subscribe. So it's interesting. I'd sign up to the newsletter, but not necessarily subscribe. Until you've made loads of money.
Great, that's awesome. Gordon, do you want to add anything to that on the investor side of things?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I mean, I think that, and Josh, I think you'd agree with this. That's probably been one of the big changes over the last few years, is that investors have become much more discerning. So I think as more opportunities come available, and as people like Josh and others that provide better frameworks for people to understand exactly what people are doing, it's getting harder and harder to kind of greenwash, and investors really want to know, what am I getting? So if an investor is willing to forego perhaps a little bit of financial return because they really like the impact, they're going to do that. That's not a huge problem, but they definitely are not going to do it on just kind of a fuzzy comment about we do good. It's going to be a lot more about, what we're doing is measurably changing something. And so that communication is really quite critical to investors. And investors, they generally speaking, they worked really hard to make their money. So they're going to be pretty careful about where they invest it. So being crisp on that is increasingly important.
Awesome. Thank you, Gordon. So lots of you have said that convening some kind of digital gathering, whether that's WhatsApp or Slack, would be really useful. So that has made my day, because I will be gladly doing that. So I'll try and do that and send that out in an email for you guys to register with. I'll start with a WhatsApp group. I think the deal will be, if you can all invite somebody that's in the impact space to that WhatsApp group, and then when we get to over 100, then I'll set up a Slack channel. So that's the deal. We need to get that rolling. I'm sure that'll be no problem for you guys. Okay, so someone is a founder of it's a product for visually impaired people that matches them with a verified volunteer to walk together towards similar destinations. That's really cool. And then they have a question. So they're registered as a PVT Ltd and not as a charity, and they want to go in the way of a tech startup, but the majority of grant funds consider only charitable or PVT Ltd with guarantee share distribution. What are your thoughts on the legal structure for a social enterprise?
So quite honestly, this is not my bag. This is, so as the work that we're doing, we do have an expert on this who, so I mean, honestly, I couldn't give you any information that I would really advise that you follow in terms of what legal structure you would take. Although definitely true that I think it's understanding what you're going for. So if you're going in the way of a tech startup, is grant funding what you're really after, or are you looking for investment there?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the only comment I would add is there's a lot of new structures that have come about. Some of them actually targeting, kind of quasi charity impact. Challenge with a lot of those new structures is they're just not familiar. Investors don't like things that are unfamiliar, that are unclear. Similarly, I think you've also correctly pointed out that grant funding and a lot of foundations and government money only works really for very specific structures. So whereas I think you can look and see, it appears that there's a lot of different funding available from all kinds of different sources. A lot of those sources are exclusive. In other words, you have to be a certain type of organization to access that funding, and everybody else wouldn't be able to do it. So I think I would just reiterate what Josh is saying, and this is something that we take very seriously as we get the right legal advice engaged to make sure that the objectives that you're looking for, that your structure matches those objectives.
Great.
Oh, this one from Frankie.
Yes, I was just about to say that. What are the top 3 books of impact that you might recommend people reading? So
I'm not sure I should give you 3 because I don't expect you to go out and read 3 books. And one of them, I'm going to say one that I don't think you should read, because I think I've told Gordon and the rest of the team to read it. And it's called Measuring. I can't even remember what it's called. Gordon, do you have it there? Measuring Social Change. It's called Measuring Social Change.
Yeah, I got it.
This is really geeky. It's a bit, let me say geeky. It's really really accessibly technical in understanding 4 different ways that an organization can create and measure social change. And a lot of kind of what I was saying before, it's like you don't want to get too bogged down in thinking you need to run like a randomized control trial to measure your impact, when actually you can understand that in a bit more of a logical, theoretical way and actually put more resources to creating impact. What I want to say is the Ben and Jerry's book, which Gordon recommended to me, it's called Double Dip, and it's super fun read. I found myself eating a lot more ice cream over the past couple of months, but that's that for a summer holiday book. I'd read that. The one Gordon showed is great. Maybe we can send book recommendations on the newsletter as we
it'd be great.
do that.
Yeah. Okay, so I think this is possibly going to be the final question, unless any others have any more. Are there any particular frameworks that are more investable or attractive to investors than others? And then someone wants to know about the stage of startup that we're considering for the accelerator: pre-revenue, idea, or MVP.
So, and I'll try and wrap in this one from Sophie as well. On so the particular frameworks, Frankie, the stage of I'm trying to wrap my one together. The stage of startup we're considering, I think that's more, question, Gordon, how would you define the stage of startup that we'd
Yeah, so let me
consider
just
for the
briefly
accelerator?
say, that's not an easy question, not because we're trying to be evasive, but simply because there's some people that actually are fairly early. If they have the right kind of dedication and can demonstrate a very clear pathway, could make huge headway. So in the application process, if you can make that clear to us, we're willing to engage with very early, just like you've formed your company, you have to demonstrate that you've actually done some work on it. We want to see a little bit more than just an idea. So, but in terms of that, you've put that together and you have some traction, you can identify that, this is something that really worked. Early stage will be fine. Later stage is also great. We can do a lot to help people scale, but we kind of want to, in that regard, we want to make sure that you're very open-minded, because if you've kind of plateaued or it's not not going the way you want it to, we want to make sure that we can work with you to kind of change that trajectory. So not being evasive, but try to explain that to us in your applications, and we'll be really responsive in terms of getting back feedback. So Josh, you want to talk about the frameworks?
Yeah, so in terms of the frameworks, and I think this kind of wraps in with what I've talked about example wise, focusing on human experience. It's not necessarily the framework or the focus that is our focus. It's more finding this sweet spot where the business success creates the impact. And similar to on the point around what about ecological or animal positive as a focus, 100% up for what. So we're interested in that. I've done a lot of work on animal, a lot of work on environmental focus stuff specifically, and some work on preventing animal cruelty, both in the food supply chain and in, say, cosmetics testing. And this is attractive to investors so long as it's a compelling customer proposition, right? So ultimately, it's attractive to investors so long as it creates a business and a product or a service that seems really viable and that people want. So I would say any issue could be an impact issue, any issue could be a sustainability issue, but we wouldn't want to say you couldn't do something that particularly focused something that was really close to your heart because it wasn't an impact issue. It's just making sure that it's an impact issue that works as a startup, works as a business, rather than something. Some things are more well suited to charitable causes, for instance.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh, and thank you so much, Gordon. I think we're probably going to wrap it up there for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you, particularly because it's been such a delightfully sunny evening for you all. Sadly, not for me. I'm in Northern Ireland and it's always freezing here, but great to have you with us. What I'll do is I will send out those links for the program and also for referring if you know an impact startup, if you're not a startup yourself. And we will be in touch on email with more information. Again, if you want more information more regularly, then the best thing to do is to sign up to our newsletter. You'll get all the insider tips on everything that we're up to. Someone had asked who was behind the accelerator. So there are 4 of us and we're on the call. So I'll just try and spotlight the guys. So we've got Gordon, Ben, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to scroll. Sorry, my screen. Let me find Ian. Sorry, 1 second. Here he is. Here he is. Ian. And me. And then Josh is involved as well. He's obviously heading up the impact on the faculty side. The side of that. So thank you again so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again soon. We've got another we've actually got another session next week. Gordon, do you want to just spend like 30 seconds on that? Because I think that might be really interesting for these guys.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it. So, last week we introduced Steve Cockram, and this week we have Josh, kind of 2 of our core faculty members, but we thought people might be interested in hearing from some impact startups about what their journey's been like, why they went on an accelerator in particular, and also what it's been like to raise capital. So I know that's always a key topic for founders. So they're going to be, we have 3 of them coming next week, and you'll have to kind of look on the Eventbrite. Well, I won't release the names. I guess we'll be sending those out soon, SL. But 3 exciting startups that will be joining me on a panel next week. And once again, we'll open it up for questions. So if you have some questions you want to ask of some impact startup founders, next week is a great place to be.
Awesome. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, guys. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.